The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the suburban landscape. The quiet hum of evening filled the air as Daniel Carter pulled into the driveway of his modest home in Naperville, Illinois. It had been a long day at the high school where he taught history, filled with a mix of adolescent enthusiasm and teenage rebellion. He was looking forward to spending time with his wife, Megan, and their son, Jake. Life was good, or so he thought. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of his wife's cooking enveloped him, a comforting reminder of home. The soft sounds of laughter echoed from the living room, where Jake, now 15, was sprawled out on the couch, his eyes glued to the TV screen. Daniel felt a flicker of warmth at the sight of his son, who had inherited his passion for history and Megan's ambition. "Hey, buddy," Daniel called out, ruffling Jake's hair as he passed by. "Dad, you're home." Jake responded with a distracted wave, barely taking his eyes off the screen. "Dinner's almost ready." Megan chimed in from the kitchen, her voice cheerful. Daniel smiled, appreciating her efforts to maintain the family dynamic. They had been married for nearly a decade, and though their relationship had its ups and downs, he still felt a deep connection to her. At least he wanted to believe that. But as he set his keys down, a strange sensation washed over him, a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach that something wasn't quite right. It had been building for weeks like a storm brewing on the horizon, but he brushed it off, attributing it to the stress of work and the typical pressures of family life. As they gathered around the dinner table, the conversation flowed easily at first, discussions about Jake's latest school project and Megan's work, where she had recently received a promotion. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Megan's laughter seemed forced, her eyes darting away whenever he caught her gaze. After dinner, Daniel excused himself to grade papers in the study, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. As he sat surrounded by the papers, the words blurred on the page and his mind wandered. He recalled how vibrant and ambitious Megan had been when they first met in college. Her dreams of becoming a successful marketing executive had ignited a passion in him. But somewhere along the line, the vibrancy had dulled, overshadowed by routine and unfulfilled aspirations. It wasn't long before he heard the sound of laughter again. This time, it was a different tone, deeper and more intimate. Frowning, he pushed his chair back, curiosity piqued. He walked toward the living room, the laughter fading just as he approached the doorframe. Daniel's heart raced as he took a breath and stepped inside. What he saw was like a punch to the gut. There on the couch, entwined in an embrace, were Megan and Richard, her boss, their laughter now hushed, replaced by startled expressions as they realized they had been caught. The room felt as if it had been sucked of air. Time froze in that moment. "Megan?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, filled with disbelief and hurt. "Daniel?" Megan scrambled to sit upright, her face flushed with panic. Richard quickly rose, his demeanor shifting from casual to defensive as he glanced between them. "What the hell is this?" Daniel's voice trembled with anger. He felt betrayed, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath him. The world he had built was shattering around him. "Megan, how could you?" He turned to her, seeking an explanation that would never come. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously. "Not what it looks like. You're in our home with him." Daniel's voice rose, filled with a mix of rage and disbelief. The realization struck him like lightning. All those late nights, the whispered phone calls, the sudden change in her behavior, it all made sense now. "Daniel, please," Richard interjected, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "Let's talk about this." "No. Get out of my house," Daniel shouted, his face burning with humiliation and anger. He couldn't believe that the woman he had loved and trusted had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. "Daniel, listen to me. I was going to tell you," Megan pleaded, her voice cracking. "Tell me what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you're in love with him?" The words felt like venom on his tongue. "Daniel, please, it was a mistake," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A mistake. A mistake doesn't happen in our living room," he yelled, the pain and betrayal surging through him like wildfire. Jake emerged from the hallway, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on?" "Nothing, Jake. Just go back to your room," Daniel snapped, not wanting to drag their son into this nightmare. But Jake, sensing the tension, stepped further into the room. "Dad, I want to know." "No," Daniel barked. He turned back to Megan, the woman he had married, the mother of his child, and felt a deep sense of loss. "I can't believe you would do this to us." With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to escape the suffocating confines of his life. The cool night air hit him like a wave as he stumbled toward his car, his heart pounding in his chest. Daniel drove aimlessly, tears blurring his vision, rage bubbling just beneath the surface. He felt hollow, as if someone had taken a piece of him and left an emptiness that couldn't be filled. Memories of laughter, family dinners, and moments of love flickered through his mind like a cruel joke. As the night wore on, he found himself parked in a secluded lot by the river, the water shimmering under the moonlight. It was a peaceful place, one he had often visited to clear his head, but tonight it felt foreign. He sat in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. The next day, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't stay. He couldn't face Megan, and he couldn't bear to see Jake, knowing he had unknowingly helped cover up the lie that had shattered their family. So he packed a bag, left a brief note, and vanished into the night, leaving behind everything he had once cherished. Daniel moved to a different city, adopting a new identity and finding a teaching job in a small town. He buried the memories of Megan and Jake deep within him, trying to convince himself that starting fresh was the only way to heal. But the wound never truly closed. It lingered like a ghost haunting his thoughts. 5 years passed, and Daniel had created a life marked by solitude. He lived simply, finding solace in his work and the occasional friendships that blossomed. Yet the absence of family weighed heavily on him. He often wondered how Megan and Jake were faring, but each time he found himself spiraling into memories, he forced those thoughts aside, telling himself that they were better off without him. Then one rainy evening, as he settled into a routine that had become all too familiar, the doorbell rang, shattering the fragile peace he had built. The sound echoed through his small apartment, and with a mix of anxiety and curiosity, he made his way to the door. When he opened it, he was met by an unexpected sight. Jake stood there, older and more mature, yet with an expression of turmoil that mirrored the pain Daniel had left behind. "Dad," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. At that moment, Daniel's heart dropped. The past was crashing down around him, and he had no idea how he would confront the storm that had come knocking at his door. Daniel stood frozen at the doorway, shock rippling through him like a cold wave. The years had added subtle lines to Jake's face, transforming the boy he once knew to a young man filled with an unspoken heaviness. Daniel's heart raced, a mix of emotions flooding his mind: anger, confusion, and a deep-seated love for his son that had never truly faded, even after all the years apart. "Jake," Daniel finally managed to say, his voice choked with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Jake shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Can I come in?" Daniel hesitated. The memories of their last encounter, how he had walked away from everything, flooded back. He could still picture the pain in Jake's eyes when he had stormed out of their home, leaving his son to face the fallout of his mother's betrayal alone. With a sigh, he stepped aside, allowing Jake to enter. The apartment felt claustrophobic as Jake stepped inside, the walls closing in as they faced each other for the first time in 5 years. Daniel felt the weight of regret settle heavily on his chest, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. "Do you want something to drink?" Daniel offered awkwardly, heading toward the kitchen. He busied himself, pouring a glass of water, trying to quell the storm brewing inside him. "It's been a while." "Yeah, it has," Jake replied, his voice low. He settled into a chair, glancing around the small, sparsely furnished living room. It was a stark contrast to the home they had shared in Naperville, filled with memories and family photos. There were no reminders of a life once lived here, only the echoes of solitude. Daniel returned with the water and took a seat across from Jake, the tension palpable. "So, what brings you here after all this time?" he asked, attempting to sound casual, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Jake looked up, his expression troubled. "I need to talk to you about something important." Daniel's heart sank. He could see the urgency in Jake's eyes, a blend of fear and desperation that unnerved him. "What is it?" After a long pause, Jake took a deep breath. "You've had a daughter, Dad." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. "What do you mean?" "I don't have a daughter." The denial slipped out before he could stop it, but something deep inside him stirred, a flicker of recognition. "Her name is Leela. She's 5 years old, and she needs your help," Jake continued, his voice trembling. "She has a terminal illness, and the doctors say you're the only match for her transplant." Daniel's mind raced. This couldn't be real. "How do you even know about this?" he demanded, a mix of anger and confusion surging within him. "Why did your mother tell me?" "Because she didn't want you to know," Jake admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "After you left, Mom told me to keep it a secret. She said you didn't deserve to know about her." Daniel felt a wave of fury mixed with betrayal wash over him. Megan had kept this from him, kept a child from him. A child he had never even known existed. How could she do that? How could you help her keep that secret? He shot back, feeling the walls of anger closing in. "It wasn't easy," Jake replied, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I hated lying to you, but Leela, she's just a little girl. She's innocent in all of this." Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose, grappling with the revelation. "So what do you want from me? Why should I help someone I never met?" "I'm not responsible for this," he snapped. the words tasting bitter on his tongue. "Because she's your daughter?" Jake insisted, his voice rising. "She needs you, Dad. She's fighting for her life, and the doctors say she might not have much time left. If you don't help her, she could die." Daniel recoiled at the weight of Jake's words. A daughter. The thought settled heavily on him, overwhelming his senses. He had always imagined having children someday, but he had thought it would be with Megan, not with the shadow of betrayal looming over him. "What if I say no?" Daniel challenged, his voice a low growl. "What if I just walk away again?" "Then you'll be turning your back on a child who needs her father," Jake said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't let you do that. She needs you now more than ever." As Daniel absorbed his son's plea, the memories of his own childhood surged back, the dreams he had held for himself, the hopes of being a father, the love he had wanted to give. But that dream had shattered 5 years ago when he walked away from Megan and Jake. Could he really face this new reality, the daughter he had never known? "I can't just step back into that life," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "I don't know how to be a father after everything." "You don't have to be perfect," Jake said, his voice breaking. "You just need to be there for her. She doesn't know you, but she needs a chance, Dad. We can figure it out together." Daniel's heart ached at the thought of a little girl waiting for him, battling for her life. But the anger simmered beneath the surface, anger at Megan for keeping this from him, anger at himself for being in this situation. "Why now? Why did you come here after all this time?" "I waited until I was old enough to make my own decisions," Jake replied. "I wanted to give you time to heal, but Leela is running out of time. I thought you deserved to know." A heavy silence fell between them, the weight of their shared history pressing down like a stone. Daniel felt the urge to retreat, to shut out the painful emotions clawing at his heart. But something inside him, a flicker of fatherly instinct, began to rise. He had spent years distancing himself from the pain of his past, yet now it beckoned him, demanding his attention. "I need time to think," Daniel said finally, his voice steadying. "Okay," Jake said, his expression falling. "But you don't have much time. Leela needs the transplant soon. We'll be at the hospital if you change your mind." With that, Jake stood and headed for the door. Daniel watched his son go, the emptiness of the room swallowing him whole. Once the door closed behind Jake, Daniel sank into his chair, the reality of what he had just learned crashing down around him. He stared blankly at the wall, thoughts spiraling out of control. A daughter. How could he reconcile this new reality with the life he had built? As memories of Megan flooded his mind, he felt a mix of anger and longing. The life they had shared, the family they had dreamed of, it all felt like a distant dream, now tainted by betrayal. The next few hours passed in a blur. Daniel tried to focus on grading papers, but his mind drifted to Jake's words, replaying their conversation over and over. Each time he thought of Leela, a small voice in the back of his mind urged him to step up, to be the father he had always wanted to be despite the circumstances. He envisioned the little girl, what she might look like, the sound of her laughter, the way her eyes would light up when she saw him. But with those thoughts came a deep-seated fear. Could he really be the father she needed? What if he failed her just as he felt he had failed himself? As night fell, Daniel finally succumbed to exhaustion, collapsing into bed with thoughts swirling in his mind. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of a little girl reaching out to him, her small hands slipping away just as he tried to grasp it. He woke in the early hours of the morning, drenched in sweat, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Days passed, and Daniel found himself haunted by the revelation of Leela's existence. He went through the motions of teaching, but every smile from his students felt like a reminder of the daughter he had never known. He could hardly focus on lesson plans, his mind drifting to thoughts of a hospital, doctors, and the impending reality of a life at stake. Finally, he reached for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed Jake's number. "I'm coming," he said when Jake answered, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll help her." The relief in Jake's voice was palpable, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to be the father Leela needed. As he packed his bag for the hospital, determination filled him, pushing away the shadows of doubt. He wasn't just stepping back into a life he had left behind, he was stepping into a new role, one that could redefine who he was. With each step toward the hospital, Daniel felt the weight of his past lift slightly, replaced by the promise of a future. A chance to be the father he had always wanted to be despite the pain of betrayal that lingered in the background. Daniel drove through the bustling streets of Chicago, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The neon lights of the city blurred past him, but his focus remained on the hospital looming ahead. Each beat of his heart echoed Jake's words. "You've had a daughter." Those words had been seared into his mind, forcing him to confront a reality he had never imagined. As he parked the car, he took a moment to breathe deeply, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions within him. Anxiety coiled tightly in his chest, but beneath it, a sense of determination began to take shape. He was here for Leela, his daughter, and he couldn't let her down. Entering the hospital, he was met with the sterile set of antiseptics and the constant hum of activity. Nurses and doctors moved briskly through the halls, their expressions a mix of focus and concern. Daniel felt out of place amidst the chaos, but he pushed through, following the signs to the pediatric ward. Each step felt heavier, his mind racing with questions about the little girl he had yet to meet. When he arrived at the ward, he found Jake waiting outside a small room, his face etched with worry. As soon as he saw Daniel, Jake rushed over, relief washing over him. "You came," he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "I couldn't stay away," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. "How was she?" She's stable, but they say she needs the transplant soon." "We don't have much time," Jake said, his voice trembling slightly. "I think you should meet her." The weight of Jake's words pressed down on Daniel as they approached the room. He felt a strange mix of excitement and dread, the urge to turn back surging within him. But he couldn't do that. Not now. With a deep breath, Daniel stepped inside. The sight before him was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Leela lay in a small hospital bed, her tiny frame dwarfed by the white sheets. She was pale, with curly brown hair spilling across the pillow. A faint smile broke across her face when she saw Jake, her eyes sparkling with a mix of innocence and curiosity. "Hi, Leela," Jake said softly, sitting by her side. "I brought someone to see you." As Leela turned her gaze toward Daniel, a flicker of recognition passed through her expression. "Who's that?" she'd asked, her voice a delicate whisper. "This is your dad," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "He's here to help you." Daniel felt a wave of emotions crash over him as he stepped closer to the bed. "Hi, Leela," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm Daniel. I'm your dad." Her gaze held his, and for a moment, he saw not just the child in front of him, but a reflection of everything he had lost and everything he had yet to gain. "Dad?" she repeated, the words sounding strange yet familiar on her lips. "Yeah," Daniel said, feeling the warmth of the tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm here for you." Leela smiled weakly, and in that moment, something shifted within Daniel. The past, the betrayal, the anger, all of it began to fade away, replaced by a fierce desire to protect this little girl and be the father she needed. They spent the next hour talking, or rather, Jake talked, while Daniel absorbed every word, feeling the bond between them strengthen with each passing moment. Leela told them about her favorite toys, her love for princesses, and how she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Daniel listened, captivated by her spirit and resilience, a fire igniting in his heart. Suddenly, a nurse entered the room, checking on Leela's vitals. She smiled at Daniel and Jake. "It's great to see you both here. Leela is doing remarkably well, given the circumstances. We're all rooting for her," she said, glancing at Leela with a warm smile. "Thank you," Daniel replied, the words barely escaping his lips. He felt a swell of gratitude toward the nurse and everyone who had cared for his daughter, but he couldn't shake the fear that gripped him. What if he wasn't the right match? What if he let her down? As the nurse finished her checks, she turned to Daniel. "If you're willing to proceed, we can start the test for the transplant tomorrow. It will be a simple procedure, and if everything aligns, we can schedule the surgery right after." Daniel's heart raced at the implications. Tomorrow. It was all happening so fast, and yet it felt surreal. I want to do it," he said, determination rising within him. "Great," the nurse said, making notes on her clipboard. "We'll prepare everything and keep you updated." Once the nurse left, Jake turned to Daniel, his expression filled with hope. "Are you sure about this? It's a big step." "I can't turn my back on her," Daniel replied, his voice steady now. "She deserves a chance, and I'll do whatever it takes." Jake's eyes lit up, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you would come through for her." With each passing hour, Daniel felt the heaviness in his chest lift slightly. He spent time with Leela, learning more about her and sharing stories of his own childhood. They laughed together, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of belonging and purpose. As evening fell, the hospital grew quieter, the hustle and bustle giving way to a calmness that wrapped around them. Daniel glanced at Leela, her eyes growing heavy as she fought to stay awake. "Leela, it's okay to rest," he said gently, his heart swelling with affection. "I'll be right here. Will you read me a story?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Daniel replied, reaching for a book on the bedside table. He opened it and began to read, his voice soothing and steady. As he read, he felt the connection between them deepen, a thread woven between their souls that would never unravel. When he finished the story, Lila's eyes fluttered shut, a peaceful smile gracing her lips. Daniel watched her sleep, a mix of emotions flooding him. Here was this little girl, his daughter, fighting for her life, and he had the power to help her. He felt a sense of urgency to protect her, to make sure she would have every opportunity to thrive. The next day dawned bright and clear, and Daniel was filled with a sense of purpose. He arrived at the hospital early, ready for the tests. He met with the medical team, who explained the procedures, their professionalism putting him at ease. As they took samples and conducted tests, Daniel felt a wave of determination wash over him. He was doing this for Leela, and nothing would stand in his way. Later that afternoon, he was called into a small consultation room. The doctor sat across from him, a warm smile on his face. "Mr. Carter, I'm pleased to tell you that you are indeed a match for Leela's transplant," he said, his tone professional yet empathetic. Relief flooded through Daniel, tears prickling in his eyes. "Really? That's incredible," he exclaimed, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "We'll schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning. It's a straightforward procedure, and we'll keep both of you monitored closely," the doctor explained. "Do you have any questions?" "No, I just want to make sure she's okay," Daniel replied, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He couldn't help but imagine the day when Leela would be healthy and full of life, chasing dreams and making memories. As the day wore on, Daniel spent every moment with Leela. He shared stories of his life, the lessons he had learned, and how proud he was to be her father. They played games, drew pictures, and laughed together, creating memories that would last a lifetime. That night, as Leela drifted off to sleep, Daniel felt a sense of calm wash over him. He lay next to her in the small hospital bed, feeling the warmth of her tiny body against him, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He had found his purpose again, and it was worth fighting for. The next morning, the air buzzed with anticipation. Daniel sat by Leela's side, holding her hand tightly as the medical team prepared for the surgery. "I'm right here, Leela," he whispered, brushing her hair away from her forehead. "You're going to be okay." "I know, Dad," she replied, her eyes sparkling despite the fear that loomed ahead. "You're my hero." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes as they wheeled her away to the operating room. The thought of losing her was unbearable, but he held on to the hope that surged within him. They would get through this together. Hours felt like days as Daniel paced the waiting room, anxiously glancing at the clock. The world around him faded, his thoughts consumed by Leela's well-being. Just when he felt the weight of despair creeping in, the doctor finally emerged, a smile lighting up his face. "Everything went perfectly," the doctor announced, and Daniel felt his heart leap with joy. "Leela is in recovery, and we expect her to do well." Relief washed over him as he sank into a chair, gratefulness flooding his heart. He had done this for her, and now she had a fighting chance. Over the next few days, Leela's recovery was slow but steady. Daniel remained by her side, offering encouragement and love as she fought through the pain. Each smile she gave him filled him with warmth, reminding him of the bond they had forged in such a short time. As Leela grew stronger, Daniel realized he had transformed in ways he never expected. He was no longer just a man haunted by his past. He was a father, and he would do anything for his daughter. Eventually, the day came when Leela was discharged from the hospital. Daniel watched as she was wheeled out, a grin plastered on her face. "I'm going home," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "Yeah, and we're going to have so much fun," Daniel promised, his heart swelling with love. "We'll make up for lost time, I swear." As they stepped into the sunlight, Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The past no longer held him captive. Instead, he felt free, ready to embrace this new chapter of his life. Leela took his hand, and together, they walked toward the future, one filled with laughter, love, and the promise of family. Days turned into weeks, and as Leela's health improved, Daniel found himself in a whirlwind of parenting. He reveled in the simple moments, playing in the park, reading bedtime stories, and sharing ice cream on hot summer days. With each passing moment, he felt the bond between them grow stronger, a connection forged in love and resilience. Jake, too, played a significant role in their lives, stepping into a big brother role that came naturally to him. The three of them spent weekends together, creating memories as a new family unit. Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the second chance he had been given, and he vowed to be the father Leela needed. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Leela turned to Daniel with a serious expression. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, "do you think Mom will ever come back?" Daniel felt a pang of sadness at the mention of Megan. He had thought about her often, the pain of their past still lingering like a shadow. "I don't know, sweetheart," he replied gently, "but what I do know is that I'm here for you. I'll always be here." Leela nodded, her eyes glistening. "I love you, Dad," she said, and in that moment, Daniel felt an overwhelming rush of love for the little girl who had brought him back to life. "I love you too, Leela," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. In that simple exchange, all the pain, betrayal, and heartache of the past faded away, replaced by the hope of a bright future together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel realized that he had not only found his way back to his family, but had also discovered a new definition of love and forgiveness. No longer defined by his mistakes, he embraced the beauty of redemption, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together with Leela and Jake, with a renewed sense of purpose and a heart full of love, Daniel understood that life was a series of crossroads, and he had finally chosen the right path. Together, they would build a life filled with laughter, hope, and most importantly, the unbreakable bond of family.